This was actually Chandra's idea. A couple of months ago, she asked me, what do you talk to your father about? Does he give the same advice at home that he gives on stage? I said, it's actually 10 times worse at home. He's actually much nicer on stage. So she said, okay, then when we do this whole event, why don't you ask him certain things that maybe he'll be willing to answer if you ask him? So I've made some notes. If I look at my phone, I'm clearly not texting and so on. I'm just looking at my notes, yeah? So, and one other thing, in professional settings, I refer to him by his professional initials, NRN. Certainly not what I call him at home, because sometimes people find it weird, so just a disclaimer. So, NRN, maybe we'll start with something simple and then we'll build it up. So why did you choose to become an entrepreneur? And beyond the reason that you have often stated publicly, you saw a market for software and so on and so forth, but what was your personal desire? What was your emotional need to become an entrepreneur? And I ask this from the perspective that many entrepreneurs in the audience, you know, and so on.
Well, before I try and answer that question, let me say there are two things that have happened today which are somewhat unusual for me. One is the excellent set of answers given by Ashish. So much of wisdom in his answers. I enjoyed every minute. Therefore, following him is not easy. Number two, I have never had a conversation in public with somebody who is half my age. So, therefore, that again, given that I will soon be entering my 78th year, you know, it makes me somewhat less confident than what I would like to be. Well, the question that you asked is a very important one. I was a strong leftist when I was a student. And then I went to France to work there. And on Saturdays, I went to Sorbonne and had lots of conversations with the capitalists, socialists, and communists. And I finally came to the conclusion that the only way a society can indeed remove its poverty is through the power of entrepreneurship, the power of creating jobs, the power of translating ideas into jobs, power of translating ideas into wealth for some people, investors, and power of enhancing taxes paid to the government. And that was primarily the reason why when I came back, I wanted to conduct an experiment, my first experiment. You were not even born then. So that was a failure, Softronics. And I learned some lessons from that. And the second one has done reasonably well.
So, you know, there is often, at least when you read the media, you feel there's an allure around entrepreneurs because if you're a very successful entrepreneur, you make money and so on. It's one side of life.
Hold it to you, near you.
Sorry, that's one side of life, the success that entrepreneurs see and so on.
I would say it to anybody, not just because, okay, please, yeah.
So, but can almost anybody become an entrepreneur, or are there certain traits that you feel one must inherently have, or an approach one must have to at least attempt to be an entrepreneur?
Well, I think an entrepreneur must have many attributes, and I'll speak only about a few. First, he, as late Robert Kennedy, borrowing the words of George Bernard Shaw said, most people see things as they are and wonder why. I dream of things that never are and then say, why not? In other words, he or she must have the power of imagination. He or she must be comfortable with innovation. He or she must be comfortable with doing something unusual. Second, he or she must have a lot of passion, because passion is what fuels your energy, your enthusiasm, and your ability to run the marathon. Third, the leader must have a very clearly articulatable value system. That's very, very important, because everybody looks up to the leader, everybody looks up to the founder. So therefore, his or her value system must be very clearly articulatable, and he or she must obviously lead by example. And finally, I think because the task of a founder is to convince customers, is to convince employees, to convince investors, he or she must have the ability to articulate reasonably well. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
So then does the role of a founder change over time in an organization? Because what you just articulated is at the very beginning. But does that stay consistent? Does that change? Does that evolve? How does a founder's role in a company or in building an organization, how does that evolve?
Well, in the beginning, it is all about imagining an idea whose differentiated business value to the customer is better than all other existing ideas. That's most important. Second, as I pointed out earlier, he or she must be able to articulate the power of his idea or her idea to various stakeholders to attract good employees, to attract customers. It's very, very difficult in the beginning because you almost have nothing to talk about. Third, he or she must, once again, I come back to the same thing, he or she must have high aspirations. He or she must have a lot of optimism, lot of hope, because all around you are saying, nahi yaar, ye to nahi chalega. But it is the founder that has to sustain energy from inside and run the marathon. That is the initial part. The next part is selecting employees, some key employees, sometimes called co-founders, and what I call early adopters. And for that, as I pointed out earlier, your job is all about passionately articulating why you are going to change the world. Second, you have to use innovative methods to convince your customer that you, who has really nothing, is indeed better than backing somebody who has everything. You know, in 1983, when we went to MICO, we were competing with very powerful and rich people for the data center operation thing. I realized that the only plus I had was my ability to use mathematical modeling to demonstrate that our computer for data center was much better than the other fellows. So I used a book, which obviously you know, called Jean-Luc Bayer. He used to be a professor at University of Washington, Seattle. He had written a book on quantitative methods in computer architecture. I used that book and I made a presentation. My presentation was to be for 20 minutes. It went on for 8 hours. And I asked them, have my competitors given you this data? No. So I think the second phase, your responsibility is to use some smartness, to use your passion with customers, investors, and employees. And this is the time when you have to sacrifice very heavily. Because at that time, money is very little. Challenges are huge. And you have to sacrifice hugely in terms of being away from family, being away from loved ones, traveling, with minimal expenses, staying in hotels with minimum expenses, and economizing on every expense in the company. Of course, these days it's different, but I'm talking of the olden days. So that is another very important aspect in the building up stage. And the other aspect of entrepreneurial phase of any company is quick decision making. Everything you will have to take quick decisions. You can't say, I'll form a committee and the committee will come back, will give a report and then I will decide. No, you have to decide quickly. Next, every startup company must have only one leader. There cannot be two leaders. There cannot be three leaders. It's just one leader. I was very, very fortunate to have had such compliance by all my younger colleagues. Because one thing, that leader earns the plaudits, earns the loyalty of all the younger people, because he or she sacrifices more than other people. He or she works harder than other people. He or she takes much less salary or makes huge sacrifices in salary than other people, etc., etc. This is the entrepreneurial phase. The final stage comes, and that is called managerial phase. Once the managerial phase comes in, that is when you invite managers to create systems and processes, to create protocols, to invite independent directors, to have a good governance mechanism. And, of course, by somewhere around this time you would have got listed, then you have to provide quarterly results, and all of that. So this is how a founder metamorphosizes himself or herself over these phases.
Right. And you said something very important that I think even the previous session they referred to. Anybody in this crowd who has started a company has had to recruit people. And when you don't have much to show, it's harder to recruit. So how did you recruit your first 6 or 7 colleagues?
Well, first of all, I first had to decide what kind of people do I want to recruit. My focus was on competence, because if you don't have competence, then nothing will happen. Not much work will progress. So first is competence. Second is value system. Because value system is required because in the beginning, everybody has to trust implicitly everybody else. Nobody should say, when I'm sleeping, the other fellow is putting his hand in the till. Third, the only thing the employees of the company have are your words. There is no guarantee, nothing, whether this idea will take off or not. So in order to engender such a trust amongst the people that you recruit, you must be authentic. In other words, you have to walk the talk. You must be truthful. You must be trustworthy. You must demonstrate your passion. You must walk the talk. And once you do that and then create a dream, you would have already created a dream, and once you paint the dream in rainbow colors and talk about the good days that will come, if all of us do what is needed together as a team in unison, then there is a reasonably high probability of people buying your vision. And that vision, at the end of the day, must have something in it for everybody that is in the team. It cannot be that only, four of us will make a lot of money and rest of you will suffer. No, it just won't work. So you have to create a vision which is a win-win-win-win, that kind of stuff. And once you do that, then you have selected the right kind of people and you have convinced them through your passion, through your authenticity, through your storytelling, through the stories of all other wonderful entrepreneurs who have succeeded. And I think you are only enhancing the probability of success.
Yes, but you were 35, 2 children, 80s India,
No, you are not at born.
Sorry, one on the way, one on the way.
Oh, yeah.
One child and one on the way. And if it didn't work, maybe you'd be a 40 or 42-year-old mid-level manager at most at that point in 80s India. I can't imagine there was a market for hiring a lot of those people in software those days. No. So the risk for you is very high. And then on the other hand, most of your initial younger colleagues were early 20s. They presumably had more options. So how did you convince, at least tell us one or two of them, how did you convince them that, hey, they should listen to this 35-year-old versus pretty much doing whatever else they wanted to do?
Yeah. Look, I was the head of software at Patni Computer Systems Limited, and all these guys, I had hired them. Well, Chris was one person who was hired by Ashok Patni from IIT Madras, but the rest of them I had hired. And they were all 5, 6 levels below me. For example, Nandan I hired as a software engineer trainee. Shibu I hired as a software engineer. Dinesh I hired as a software engineer. Ashok Arora I hired as a software engineer trainee. Raghavan I had hired, etc., etc. Now, when I started out on this journey, they all knew that I was earning a much, much, much higher salary than all of them. Number two, they also, in some way, I was not talking as much as I do today, they realized by my action that I had a big dream. And I also talked to them about how there was going to be an extraordinary revolution in the US in terms of super mini computers and OLTP transaction monitors and relational databases on those super mini computers, how the departments of large computers and mid-level corporations and small corporations were going to embrace computing technology for commercial applications in a big way. And the US was going to be eternally short of technical manpower. And we in India had lots of youngsters who were smart but had no jobs. So therefore, I gave them a reasonably convincing argument that the future of this company would be better, because they also knew that I had failed in my first attempt. And I had explained to them that there was no market at that time because there were very few computers in India. I was looking at the domestic market. And therefore, when I gave this argument, they understood that we were going to look at exports. We were going to look at the most dynamic market in the world, the most competitive market in the world, etc. That's how it.
Because I was talking to a couple of founders, and we've all had this experience where we have to actually convince parents of some of the folks saying, no, you should let your child join, it'll be okay, and so on. Was that experience true back then as well, or is that more of a recent phenomenon? We have to convince the family, hey, it's okay. I mean, I imagine it must be even harder then than now.
You know, it's very interesting, Rohan. We were 8 children. My mother was always in the kitchen. Because we She cooked on wood stove. Morning 6 a.m. to night 9 p.m. And father took his government job too seriously. He was away in the office from 8 a.m. to evening 8 a.m. At home also there would be fellows waiting. So somehow that environment gave us a lot of freedom. They didn't ask us, what are you going to do? Have you eaten well? Have you slept well? These were not the questions my father asked.
No, I meant in terms of the families of any of the people you had to recruit. Did you have to convince them and or their families or their friends, their social environment, that, hey, it's acceptable for you to go work at this unknown random company? I mean, I can't, in a market starved for jobs, that cannot be a simple decision.
No, I will tell you. I'll tell you. I was very, very lucky in that I had the support of my wife, your mother. When I resigned on her birthday, I still remember, 19th August 1976, I met her. I said, happy birthday, and then I said, I have resigned. But she smiled, as she always does, and she said, not an issue. We will live within whatever means we have. I will fully support you, and you will succeed. So I was away, in some sense, I was away from all the other people that you spoke about. The only person I was very friendly with was my friend, okay? And she was the only person in whom I confided everything that I wanted to do. And she was an unbelievable supporter, unbelievable supporter. So in some way, my case may not be normal, but I was very lucky to have that person.
So then, surely, I mean, building on that, there would be, again, everyone who's built any kind of company, any founder goes through, the buck stops with the founder ultimately, certainly in the early days. They go through tremendous moments of doubt, uncertainty. At least as far as I'm aware, in no interview ever have you admitted to any of that. So surely, and you're not Superman against all belief. So in those moments, did you feel, hey, maybe this won't work? Or what will I do? Because again, your colleagues are 12, 13 years younger than you. You can't really go to them and say, hey man, I'm really worried. This is something all founders everywhere in the world go through. So in those moments, did you have moments, or when you had those moments like that, what did you do? What was your plan B, or how did you deal with them?
Well, Rohan, the reality of life is fear, doubt, uncertainty. These are parts of everybody's life. But it is so, particularly in the case of an entrepreneur. As I told you, when I decided to leave my job and start, I said, look, I've got this wonderful job. I'm getting so much of money. My wife has got a job in telco in Nanavati Mahala in Bombay. Everything is fine. No, already I have failed once. So is this the right thing I'm going to do? It was there. Second, when I had to get the first customer, Database Corporation, there were so many odds against us. There was a lot of fear, a lot of doubt. Third, when we had to get the first domestic customer so that we could have a steady stream of revenue from our data center activity, we were pitted against huge guys. That was also a lot of doubt about self, a lot of fear. When we went public, that was a big time of doubt, fear, uncertainty. whether it will do well or not, whether we'll
And
make it.
it didn't do very well the first time in India.
Yeah, I'm saying. And then there was the issue of I had to take a decision in 1995 not to renew the contract with a Fortune 10 company. And at that time, the revenue from that company was forming 25% of our revenue. We had just gone public. And all the other big guys, I don't want to mention their names, but everybody knows who are the top 4, 5 people, players in our field. All of them signed on the dotted line. I was the only crazy guy. And all my younger colleagues were not in favor of not continuing with it. That was a big moment of fear and doubt. So again, this is what I learned from my wife, and that is, she said, in fact, I still remember, I told all my colleagues who were sitting there that, look, I have to make a call on the landline outside. It was in Taj Residency. I went out, I called her, and I said, look, so far, you have looked after the children, totally. But for the next 4 or 5 years, you have to do it even more of it, because I will be away anywhere between 250 to 300 days in a year, because I am going to take a very tough decision, the toughest in my life. And that will only be possible if you agree with, because others were not, even Mohan was against it. She said, don't worry, I am always with you. And more importantly, she said, there are times when logic doesn't hold good. There are times when you have to transcend logic and embrace faith. And that is the time when your belief in God will all fructify, because as Bhagavad Gita says, karmanadhikaraste and all of that. That is, do whatever you are supposed to do to the best possible way, in the best possible manner, and leave the rest to God. So I think in some way, in the time when all of you have fear, doubt, and uncertainty, do the best that you can do. Get into further and further detail and delineate. After all, what is uncertainty? Uncertainty is only that the probability of an event is low, or a certain thing. And what did Bayes' theorem tell all of us? Bayes' theorem said, by obtaining more and more information, you can enhance the probability of that event, right? So that's what she said, and that's what I followed. So I don't think you people need to worry too much about fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Have faith in God. But before you have faith in God, you have to do everything possible under the circumstances. Then everything will be fine.
But living under that kind of constant uncertainty, fear, self-doubt, what does that do to you personally? Or what did it do to you personally, your personality? Because that seems like a fairly extreme way of living for decades together. Or at least, let's say, the first 2 decades, maybe not 4 decades.
It's. I'm glad you asked that question. That evening, when I took that decision at Taj Residency, Fanish was just joined as the head of sales, and I were in the same car. We are going back to the Electronic City. It was the wretched road. Everybody knew at that time, 2.5 hours.
We are back to the same place now.
Anyway, sorry. No, but that is a fact anyway.
Agreed.
Sorry. And then I was somewhat silent, but I was saying some reasonable words to Fanish. But Fanish got upset with me. He said, Mr. Murthy, you don't seem to be worried. You're least concerned about the company. Then I told him something which is so important. I said, look, Fadish, when a child is not well at home, neither of the parent shows panic. The father gives confidence to mother, mother gives confidence to father. Because by becoming panicky at that time, you will only make things worse. So therefore, one principle I adopted, and that is, when I left the office at 8:30 in the evening and when I was back home by 9 o'clock, by which time you and Akshata would have finished your studies, your mother would have made sure that you've done all your homework and all of that, we would take you to McFast here. And just seeing you people enjoy eating that pizza or whatever, you people wanted, that brought so much of joy and happiness to us. And of course, to boot, while returning, you would lie down on the road in front of that toy shop saying, I want this cement toy. No, but I enjoyed it every minute. I enjoyed it because I needed a light moment. I didn't want a serious moment. So I think every one of us will design and invent, or not invent, create certain unique ways of making your own mind relaxed and also finding some kind of calmness.
I'm just checking. I don't know how much time we have left. The monitor doesn't show me either. So can someone cue me? No, I don't want to hold the next speaker. I know there's a next event. So Chandra, maybe you'll cue me? Oh, wow, okay, fine. But in all of these years, again, whenever I ask these questions, I was just imagining there'd be many founders in the audience.
Of course.
I mean, I'm projecting some of my own experience being founder as well, certainly in this conversation, asking these questions. So you go through these moments, tremendous moments of uncertainty and doubt, self-doubt, and so on. But during that, how do you keep your team together? How do you keep them still believing? And I don't just mean, your 6 younger colleagues, your co-founders. I meant, maybe there are 50 or 100 or 300 or 400 people. How do you keep them still believing?
That is where...
Because inside, you will have tremendous self-doubt, but you have to now project confidence to a larger group.
No, that's what parents do. That's the primary job of parents, to bring a certain sense of calmness to the environment at home, to encourage the children, to tell them that there is no problem, right? So therefore, what I would do was to crack jokes in the office and to start on something new. I mean, it may not be very strategic, but something new, and then talk to them about how other people have gone through bigger problems than we are going through, how God is with us, and then I would tell them, look, last night I went to Raghavendra Swami Mutt. So I think these things give people some confidence. In other words, the whole human relationship is based on faith and trust. Husband has trust and faith in wife. Wife has trust and faith in husband. We have faith in God. All of that, right? So therefore, creation of trust is by showing them how authentic you are, how genuine you are in caring for them, how you are always there to take care of them, by doing very simple things like, let's say we would go to a canteen. There was only one canteen at that time. So I knew that, let's say on one of those days, I'd say Dinesh liked something. So I would give part of my food to him. I would say, Dinesh, please, I know you like it, eat it. So I think small things in life make a lot of difference in raising the confidence, trust, and faith of your youngsters in you. So therefore, we all cannot keep on telling lies, because the moment they think that it is all lie, they won't trust you anymore. So you have to be authentic as much as possible. But you should not be panicked. You should not, make them kind of start crying. Right? Yeah.
One of the things you always told me is, it's not just entrepreneurship, it's true for all of life, that life is a series of compromises. And you say some of the compromises are geometric progression, some are linear progression, and so on. And I don't know if you'll want to answer this publicly, but I'll still ask you. What is the most significant compromise in your professional life that you've had to make? If you don't answer specifically, you can tell us at least the philosophy behind it.
No, I think I will give you a general gyan, because there's so many wonderful entrepreneurs, and they too would face it. See, any group, any team has a portfolio of some people who lack transparency, some people who do not take any bottom line responsibility, some people who are waffling, some people who start biases very quickly, etc., etc. It is always there. Now, the smartness of the leader, which all of you are, is to realize it, and to the extent possible, emphasize the strengths in situations and de-emphasize weaknesses in situations. There is no 100% solution to any of these. Let's say you are in a discussion where you are discussing the next quarter result. Supposing there is somebody who has a habit of leaking. I've come across such people too at Infosys. Not among my co-founders, but somebody else. Now, then the best thing to do is to, in a nice way, without that person losing his face, make sure that he is not part of that discussion. So what you are doing is you are reducing your risk. You are de-emphasizing the weaknesses. So I think that is the only way. I've deliberately not answered, given specific examples, because that's not the purpose of this discussion. Because those examples may not mean anything to any of them.
Fair enough. But just switching gears a little bit, right, on top of moving away from all the uncertainty and fear, the positive side, there's an analyst report, I think late 90s, maybe early 2000s, that said Infosys was God's own company. That was the title. And it listed all the first company to give stock options in India. I suspect many people here know. In fact, there had to be some case in the Supreme Court that had to be resolved for
we
this.
We won that case.
Yeah, to make it possible.
Thanks to Mohan.
Yeah, thanks to Mohan Das Pai, and that made it possible for all future generation of companies in India to do this. First company to do this, first company to do that, to voluntarily declare quarterly results when it was not really mandated or required for listed companies, and et cetera, and so on. It feels like, at least to me, when I read these things, a lot of these things come out of the philosophy of the founder, of some kind of philosophy, some kind of culture that the founder must believe in. And then the organization is a manifestation of all of these things. Is that a fair assessment, fair characterization? And if so, then how important is the role of a founder's philosophy in building an organization, in creating a deep culture that permeates through all levels?
Oh yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's extremely important. The founder, at least till he or she retires, has the imprint of his soul on how deliberations take place in the company. In our own case, because I was a leftist to begin with, because I came from a family of 8 children and a high school teacher as father, so therefore we were lower middle class. We were taught that sharing is caring. We were encouraged to share. Now, similarly, I have had teachers who emphasized that when you people are playing football or soccer, look, it doesn't help if you try to take the ball from one end of the one goal to the next yourself. The smartness is to share the ball with others, to give a pass. So I think there were a lot of these influences. Second, as I pointed out earlier, my own experience in France and in getting converted from a confused leftist to a determined, compassionate capitalist. What do I mean by a compassionate capitalist? And that is conservatism in economic matters, liberalism in social matters. So I think, and the kind of company that you keep, the kind of trust you build in your people, the kind of sacrifices that I saw in my younger colleagues. People would be in the office up to 4 a.m. to complete the annual report for 5-6 days. And I would be going character by character through that. No, my doing was somewhat simple because, I had a car, I would go home. But there were people who didn't have a car. They had to get some rickshaw or something. So when you see such examples of commitment to the company, my view was that the best way of deriving happiness and joy is to share whatever little fruit is coming out of this exercise with as many people as possible. That is why we distributed as much as $20 billion amongst our people. And so I think it is a combination of all these. And therefore, I think, for example, punctuality. I would be there in the office at 6:20. So at that time, people realized it. So people would always come on time. I did not have to tell anybody, Bhaiya, you have not come on time. No, because your actions speak louder than your words. And, excellence. I would go and visit toilets. People knew that this guy is visiting toilets to make sure it's clean. So automatically, it gave a lot of importance to the janitors who cleaned the toilet. It increased their pride in their work, and it gave a message to other people. So I think in some way you're right, Rohan, that the founders have the potential to leave their footprint on the company, to meld their soul with the soul of the company.
So
I hope I didn't say something silly because
no, I'm not the one to judge. Clearly, the audience is the ones to judge, right? No, but this is in addition to the stock options and so on for everyone, but also at a personal level, right? I've always wanted to ask you, what is it? Is it that you didn't like money? Why do you not choose to keep, because your cap table, right, looks very different from how all of us modern entrepreneurs would create the cap table. If one were to call it a cap table at your time, but you chose not to keep as much of the company in its very inception. Why is that? I mean, I can't really relate to that decision.
No.
I mean, I mean, I'm projecting here.
No, really, I know. I don't know I mean, the reality is I can only speak for myself. I enjoyed the company of people who are happy. I enjoyed the company of people who felt I was fair to the extent possible. I enjoyed the company of people who thought that it was their company. I enjoyed the company of people who showed more enthusiasm than me in many ways. So I knew that in order to do that, I cannot say that I will keep the major percentage and then you guys do that. That is my personality. I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong about it. These are all personal philosophies. And as I told you, the character that has impressed me most in Mahabharata is Karna. Nobody else. Because of his generosity. So I think that's the way that I grew up.
Switching to something somewhat contemporary, Chandra and I were talking. Switching to slightly more contemporary issues that Chandra and I were talking about, which is, even in the previous session, there's debate on governance, young companies, and so on. But actually, in some sense, from a younger entrepreneur's perspective, you have to recruit people, you have to succeed in the market, there are lots of difficulties and challenges and problems. Now, on top of that, you have to do good governance as well. So, feels like a lot to do, so is good governance something you worry about in the beginning, or you worry about when you're successful? Or when do you start thinking about good governance for a young company?
You don't have to teach a child to start breathing. The child starts breathing when it is born. You don't have to teach a child to cry when it is hungry. It automatically asks, in its own way it cries, and you have to give food. So I think there are certain characteristics of human beings which are best acquired from very early days. And that happens because of family, because of early teachers, because of the environment you live in, because of the philosophy that you have imbibed, in my case, compassionate capitalism, because of the role models that you have had. So I think somehow it is very difficult for me to say that I will start good governance once I have become a $20 billion company. I think that is...
So you say it's a philosophy that you either imbibe or you don't.
Yeah.
It's just a way of life.
Yeah.
Got it. The last section, yes, that's actually helpful.
Yeah.
Since you're talking about, the importance, for example, of good governance or other things, these are philosophies that one accumulates through one's life experiences. Yeah. What is perhaps, maybe you can share one example, either from your family, your friends or teachers, because you refer to these three stakeholders quite regularly. One example from your early life that you believe has influenced how you have led your life in a professional setting, but you learned perhaps early on.
Well, I think it was my high school headmaster in Mysore city. He was extremely strict, very, very strict. Now, he was teaching us chemistry, and that was the last class of the day. For 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. And I was sitting in the front bench. And that day, he was conducting an experiment where he needed to put common salt into a test tube. And he was being very, very careful about the amount of common salt that went into the test tube. I had a friend of mine called Anant Srinivas Prasad who was sitting next to me, and he burst out laughing. So Mr. K.V. Narayan stopped the experiment. He came to our front bench and he said, "Young man, what is so funny about what I was doing?" You see, children are generally more honest than elderly people. They have still not acquired the art of lying convincingly. Anant Srinivas Prasad said, "Sir, you are extremely stingy with common salt, which is so inexpensive." That's why I laughed. And then he said something which has lived with me even today, and that is, he said, "Young man, this common salt belongs to this community called Shadavilas High School. It belongs to you, it belongs to me, it belongs to all the 50 students in this class, belongs to all the students in this high school, it belongs to every teacher, every staff. Therefore, I have to treat this common salt with utmost respect." And he said, on the other hand, 5 o'clock our class is finishing. Please come with me to my house. I will give you a glass full of common salt free because that's my personal property. You know, Rohan, you remember Sudha telling a story about my foolishness or idiosyncrasies at 40th year of Infosys. I think you were there, right? I think some of these things stick in your mind. They don't go away. They form indelible mark on your psyche. The whole Infosys was run on that principle. That is, put the interest of the community ahead of your personal interest in everything you do in the short and medium term, and you will be a winner in the long term. So I think that is one thing that has stuck with me, and I think it will be there till I, go away. Yeah.
And last question, and then we are done. So is it ultimately destiny or is it luck for an entrepreneur?
You know, I am a very traditional person. I believe in God. Whatever that be, I don't want to enter into arguments with people. I have derived a lot of value from faith because I have been in a lot of situations where I could use logic, and I'm not bad in using logic, reasonably good. But in spite of it, I couldn't find an answer in logic. And that's when I pray, and that has given me a lot of strength. And as I think it was either Emily Zola or Louis Pasteur who said, when God is shy to announce his presence, he comes in the form of chance. Therefore, luck is extremely important. You know, and there are so many classmates of mine who are smarter than me. But they didn't have the luck to be where I was. So I think luck is very, very important. Luck also, once you believe in luck, it also brings a little bit of humility in you. So I believe in luck.
Great. With that, we're done. Thank you.
One second. Mr. Murthy, I'm going to request